Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been another busy week for us in Westminster. Rishi Sunak's premiership faced the possibility of yet another major Tory rebellion after Sir Simon Clarke called for him to be replaced. But how much damage has this lone wolf attempt done to the Tories? I'll be asking the former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland for his thoughts on the sentencing of the Nottingham killer Valdo Callacane. Did he get away with murder? I'll be speaking to Kemi Badenoch, the woman tipped to be the next Tory leader, live in the studio. And after Holocaust Memorial Day yesterday, I'll be joined by the former chair of the Jewish Labour movement, Ivor Kaplan. Does Labour still have an anti-Semitism issue? I'll also be grilling former MEP and Boris Johnson backer David Campbell Bannerman about his right-wing splinter group, the Conservative Democratic Organisation. Is this the vehicle for a Cincinnati-style blonde comeback? And talking of blonde comebacks, Donald Trump has stormed to victory in the second primary in New Hampshire this week. I'll be asking his former press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, if he can make America great again. Well, before we get into all of that, and as you can see, it's a jam-packed show, very much looking forward to Kemi coming into the studio a little later. But let's go through the papers first of all with Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary, and my fellow GB News presenter who'll be with you from 11. Michael, lovely to see you this morning. What a busy morning for you. You're prepping a show and you're doing my paper review.
I couldn't be more delighted. It's lovely to be with you.
Lovely to be with you. And let's pick a story first of all that is very much well, down your street as a former Defence Secretary. Once again, we've got headlines in the Sunday Telegraph this time. UK warships lack firepower to take out Houthi bases. There's this constant string of stories, isn't there, about us being under-defended. We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous, at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me, because I've always thought these aircraft carriers were entirely a vanity project.
Really?
An aircraft carrier is an enormous target.
Yes.
And if one of these were hit and sunk, we would lose, you know, £3 billion worth of ship, £2 billion worth of aircraft and 2,000 personnel.
Yeah.
And we're never going to risk doing that. Aircraft carriers are huge things. They need to be defended. We don't have the ships to defend them. So
then it begs the question, why have them? OK. I mean, you're painting a pretty appalling picture.
The picture is indeed appalling. And there's no point having the aircraft carriers. The aircraft carriers could only operate in conjunction with allies. We need allies to defend them. There is some question as to whether the aircraft carrier is now out of date because of the advance in ballistic missile technology. And we're learning a lot from the Ukraine war, for example. We're learning how even quite small powers with sort of improvised weaponry can take out big ships. The Ukrainians have been very successful. They don't even have a navy to speak of. They're being successful against the Russian navy. So I think we're invested, you know, in the wrong things, and our kit is unreliable, not available, and not equipped for purpose.
How worried are you about what's been going on in the Middle East and beyond with regard to where we might lie in this whole conflict? Because we've also had warnings that we might be at war with Russia in 20 years' time.
I'm hugely worried. And I think the other thing that hugely worries me is there's virtually no political reaction in this country.
Yes.
I mean, despite all the things that are happening, you know, the invasion of Ukraine and then everything around Gaza and Israel and the Red Sea, there's still... It hasn't sent a shockwave through the political system in Britain. We don't have a government saying, right, all bets are off. We're now going to have to rethink our defence policy. Indeed, the posture of Grant Shapps is, oh, no, I'm not going to rethink my defence policy. So, I mean, that's, I think, what most worries me, that politicians want to pretend to the public that nothing has changed. I fear lots has changed.
We could talk about that all morning, but let's move on to the next story. There's a really interesting investigation by the Insight team on the Sunday Times suggesting that foreign students are getting a secret route to top universities. They don't need to get as higher grades as UK students wanting to get into Russell Group institutions.
The thing that depresses me about this story is that yet another British institution is shown not to be working. And until recently, the universities used to be a great source of pride for Britain. We're very close to the top of the league tables in the world for universities. But what's happening is that the amount that the universities can charge British students has hardly risen since David Cameron became Prime Minister. So it's a maximum of £9,250, £9,250. And so the universities are turning to foreign students who pay up to £38,000. But it turns out that these foreign students don't even have to be properly qualified. They can come through a backdoor route, whereby they can come in with minimal qualifications, or I mean really minimal qualifications, and they get in, and the university get 38,000. By the way, the universities are paying huge commissions to bring these people in. They're paying agencies and so on, and of course it brings down the standard of achievement of the university and may well impact the experience of the other students. If you're in classes and seminars with students who are simply not up to it, then of course the course is going to be slowed down, or British students are going to have to rely more on their own resources. So I'm sure that it is depressing the quality of British universities.
But also, if in this great experiment of social mobility that was trying to send more children to university back in Blair's day, you have a comprehensively educated child who's done really well at school. They then get the 3 A's or the 3 A stars, whatever it is that they need to get into a Russell group. They then found out that they've missed out on a place because somebody's been imported from overseas with 3 C's rather than 3 A's. How is that fair?
And then they may find their lecturers are on strike anyway. No, it's
damning indictment.
It's another miserable situation.
It is too. Tories torn apart is the headline we've put on the next section. We've got Dan Hodges writing in the Mail on Sunday about Rishi having to call the bluff of rebels, just like John Major did. Does he?
No, I think there's a bit of journalism. I mean, what John Major did was very interesting. I didn't think it was advisable, but 2 years before the election, in 1995, he said, I'm stepping down as leader and immediately presenting myself as candidate again, calling the bluff of the rebels. So, in fact, what happened was, I've forgotten his name now. John, what's his name?
Redwood.
Redwood. I couldn't get his name.
It's all right.
John Redwood stood against him, but Major was the victor. So Major established then that he was the leader and he wasn't going to be challenged in the next 2 years up to the election. We're now in election year.
Yeah.
Rishi can't do the same thing.
Is this ludicrous, then? The idea of deposing Rishi now, is it for the birds?
Completely for the birds.
What if it gets even worse, the budget doesn't go down very well, doesn't move the dial, Farage announces his retaking the helm of reform, and at that point you see reform and the Conservatives both polling at 20%?
Well, the Tories, in my view, are stuck with Rishi, and if they decide to have a leadership election, in my view, they would do even worse than sticking with Rishi.
What about my guest who's coming on later in the show, Kemi Badenoch, takes the reins? I mean, she said that she doesn't want to. There's a few briefings that I'm going to put to her.
Well, of course she doesn't want to.
Because she doesn't want to lead the Tories to defeat.
But I can't understand her wanting to lead the Tories after defeat either, for that matter, because,
really?
Well, if the Tories are reduced to a rump, they won't be back at the following election. They won't be back within 5 years. They'll be out for 10 years as a minimum. Who wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party after this defeat?
In opposition.
It will be a rump and irrelevant. No one will want to listen to a word that the leader says.
Yeah.
And that leader will lose the following election, in my view, and therefore it's not a position that anyone should want to hold.
But you speak with wisdom and experience there, because there are these mad Tory MPs who are saying, oh, maybe we need a period in opposition. And I keep on thinking, what are you talking about?
Well, they're going to have a period in opposition, but they need to recognise that it probably won't be 5 years, it will be more.
And it won't be much fun either.
And it won't be any fun.
Having said that, Badenoch sacking Henry Staunton as the chairman of the Post Office, I mean, they said that he left by mutual agreement, but I think we pretty much know what's happened.
Yes.
I mean, isn't that a little bit of manoeuvring? Isn't that trying to send a message to the public that she's quite tough and that she can take difficult decisions?
It may be. I mean, it seems to be shrouded in mystery as to what's happened. There seems possibly to have been a row about who should be the lead independent director on the Post Office board. What I think is worth noting is that royal assent was given to the Post Office Horizon Compensation Bill the other day, which means that is underway. Now, I don't know whether the chairman of the Post Office plays any part now in the government-backed scheme, which is going to compensate the postmasters, hopefully this year, hopefully before the general election. So there may have been a bit of grandstanding here, I don't know. But what she said on other channels this morning was that she'd given him a chance and he wasn't the man for the job.
No. Well, we'll push a little further on that for some more detail. Finally, I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Alabama, yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States. And asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had, obviously I was in no pain or anything like that, I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first, because you will soon be incapable of helping anybody else. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
So there's been this furore over the way that this man has been executed, but actually in comparison to lethal injection or other methods, it may well be more humane. Although I know you don't believe in the death penalty anyway.
One of the things that the programme found out was that the lethal injection had been invented by someone who was unqualified to invent it, and no research had been done on it before it was introduced. So seriously, if the state of Oklahoma, which is where the story came about, if the state of Oklahoma was prepared to switch to hypoxia because they'd seen a BBC programme with me in it, that would be another complete lack of evidence and science.
I know, I didn't
in order to introduce a new death penalty.
Bit of a stretch. Michael, you'll be back with us at 11 a.m. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed for sparing the time. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're going to be joined by the former Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary, Sir Robert Buckland. All that after the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Looking ahead to today, most of us should see some sunshine at times, and for all, it will be feeling very mild. So we start the day actually with a touch of frost in the east, but here we'll see bright skies from the word go. Elsewhere, a fair amount of cloud around and maybe the odd spit and spot of rain, but most of this cloud will tend to break up a little bit as we go into the afternoon, allowing some spells of sunshine. But up towards parts of Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, we will see this band of rain move in during the afternoon, and that will be accompanied by some very strong winds. But with the winds coming in from the south, it's going to be a very mild day. Actually, some parts of northern Wales could see highs reaching 16 to 17 degrees. Into the evening, the rain just slowly moves its way southeastwards across parts of Scotland, eventually moving into northern England and the far north of Wales later on in the night. But to the south of it, it remains mild but rather cloudy. Could just see a touch of frost as the rain clears up across the far north of Scotland. So Monday morning, we start off rather grey but mild in the south. This rain actually becomes quite slow moving across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So quite a grey, wet day to come here. But to the north of it, actually, it does start to cheer up and we will see some spells of sunshine, but also some blustery showers. Temperatures in the north cooler than on Sunday, but still mild in the south.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Sir Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary and the MP for South Swindon, joins me now. Thank you for coming in, Sir Robert. Lovely to see you. Look, it's been a very difficult week, hasn't it been? Subjected to, frankly, the angst and agony of the families of the victims of Valdo Calocane. There are questions to be answered here in this case. My first question to you as a former Justice Secretary is, how was this guy free to roam the streets? We understand he was under an arrest warrant from September 2022. The police couldn't find him, even though the victim's family say that he had a registered address in Nottingham, for 6 months before he was evicted on June the 11th, carried out the killings on June the 13th. He wasn't taking his antipsychotic medication and apparently was being unmonitored while he was doing it. How do cases like this happen?
Yes, well, there are two things there. There's the NHS and the involvement of local services in monitoring this person for his mental health condition, and then the warrant that had been issued some months before for the police to collect him and bring him in. And it does seem that from the time that he was in a secure hospital back in 2020, from his release, there doesn't seem to have been an intermediate way to deal with this individual. No medication, clearly unresolved, serious mental health issues. I'm afraid I've described this person by the time we get to June as a killing machine.
Yeah.
He was going to kill and hurt people, and it's an unutterable tragedy that two young, beautiful lives have been lost. A public servant, a caretaker, murdered, and 3 people having life-changing injuries. All that has to add up to a very serious set of questions about why it is that individuals like this, it's not the first time, have been in a position to kill. Remember Christopher Clunies all those years ago, and Jane Zito in her amazing campaign.
Emma Webber, who's Barnaby Webber's mother, has said that she believes that Rob Griffin, who is the Assistant Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire Police, has got blood on his hands and should resign. It's hard to disagree with that, isn't it?
Well, look, I think Mrs Webber has been incredibly dignified. Reading her account of her experiences and her husband's experiences, brought tears to all our eyes. Look, I think that accountability is important. I think that we need to explore precisely why it was that this set of circumstances happened, and also why it was that the families weren't told at an earlier stage about this issue of mental health. It seems that, and Mrs Webber's been clear about this, that it was a complete shock to them in November when this person is coming in for his plea hearing in the Crown Court, that the issue of diminished responsibility, which is the term in law for mental health defences, was raised for the first time. That amazed me, frankly.
Yeah. Do you know what? I'll ask you about that in just a minute, because obviously there has been the suggestion that he should have been tried for murder and put before a jury rather than being able to rely on that diminished responsibility defence. But just back to this police chief, and indeed Leicestershire Police have now faced questions about why they did not arrest Callacane on a number of occasions. So we've got 2 police forces here who haven't acted on a man who you've described as a killing machine. Surely heads need to roll. Otherwise, where is the accountability and the responsibility for these sorts of cases? Parents like me look at this case of Barnaby and Grace. You know, that could be any of our children.
Could be my kids.
Ian Coates, that could be anybody's granddad.
Yeah, exactly.
Surely responsibility needs to be taken, and I would suggest that Rob Griffin, if described by one of the victim's mothers as having blood on his hands, I know that sounds emotive, but she backed it up with a huge amount of evidence of how the police force had let them down in this case. Why shouldn't he have to resign?
Look, there are processes for this. My frustration with the IOPC, the Independent Police Complaints Authority, is that it does take a long time, and I think we need to make sure that any complaint, any issue of accountability is dealt with quickly, because this isn't just relevant for this horrendous case. It has wider implications.
Let's put it like this. Should he be considering his position?
Well, look, I think everybody concerned with the monitoring of this case needs to look at themselves and say, could I have done more? I'm not going to point a finger at individuals, but Mrs. Webber's...
in charge of that police force.
Mrs. Webber's points are very powerful, and I think we ignore them at our peril, because it could be you, it could be me in that position.
With regard to this diminished responsibility defence, I mean, clearly a doctor did say in court that he would not have committed these acts if he wasn't in the midst of a psychosis. I think we can look from the outside in. I wasn't in the court case. I wasn't following every day of the trial. But there is perhaps an argument, and I think the family's made this, that he seemed to have been premeditated in what he was doing, that he had a cache of weapons on him, that he was waiting in the shadows for some hours before he pounced in the middle of the night. That would therefore negate, one would imagine, a diminished responsibility defence. I mean, talking about him getting away with murder, that's because he wasn't tried for murder by a jury of 12 men and women, good and true, who could have made an analysis of whether he was mad, bad or both.
Yeah, look, I've been in these positions myself as a barrister, prosecuting and defending. You have to make difficult decisions based on the evidence. What I think has also, caused a little bit of a contradiction here is, of course, the pleas of guilty to attempted murder, which there's no defence of diminished...
Of the 3 victims who have been left with life-changing injuries.
There's no defence of diminished responsibility available for that. You need an intent to kill, and a murderous intent has to be proved. He admitted that, so you get that fully reflected there. But with regard to the diminished responsibility case, obviously the prosecution have to look at their evidence. There were, I think, in the end, 4 reports from experienced consultant psychiatrists, forensic psychiatrists, who came to the conclusion that there was enough evidence for diminished responsibility. I'm not going to get into the warp and woof of how these decisions are made or in this particular case, but there is no doubt that in cases like this, where you've got this limited defence available, it is very difficult for all of us, let alone the families, to come to terms with how this person had behaved, what he'd prepared to do, and then the outcome. And no amount of justice, no amount of the formal justice system will ever compensate for what happened here.
Although, obviously, the Attorney-General has now said that she is looking at the sentence, hasn't confirmed that she will refer it to the Court of Appeal judges. 3 judges could decide whether it's too lenient.
Yes.
Do you think she should refer it to the Court of Appeal?
I've been there many times, Camilla. I was Solicitor General for years, did hundreds of these cases, doing them myself in the Court of Appeal.
So yes or no in this case?
Look, I haven't seen the evidence. What I do know, there's one question I think that she will be looking at, is whether or not it was right for the judge just to impose a hospital order with a restriction rather than the option of sending the person to prison if he'd got better.
Because he could have done the hybrid order and he didn't.
Could have. The Section 45A.
As we see it now, this man is just going to remain in the hospital rather than ever be in a prison.
He does. The judge does address that in his remarks, to be fair to him. He does address it. So the attorney will have to look very carefully and judge this as a lawyer. She'll get advice from other senior lawyers and within 28 days come to a decision.
Would you be minded, perhaps, to ask the Attorney-General in the House of Commons a question about why the CPS pursued the manslaughter plea rather than a murder trial? Is that something you should ask the Attorney-General?
I certainly think that the fullest explanation would be appropriate. I'm always conscious of the fact that as a politician, it's not for me to interfere in an independent process. And as a former law officer, I was very careful about how I approach things as a lawyer as opposed to a politician, because it is important that we get these things right based on the evidence.
Although questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger. And that's why monitoring is so important. And just discharging into the community isn't good enough.
Quick question. Kemi's coming in a little later. Should she replace Rishi Sunak? Apparently a poll in the Sun on Sunday has suggested that she's got a better chance of winning the election than he has.
Oh, look, another change of leader? I don't think that would be the right thing to do. We've got a job of work to do, getting the economy right and sticking to the plan that Rishi Sunak has. That's what we should all do.
What if the plan isn't working, though, Robert? That's the trouble.
Well, look, let's not worry about the opinion points and look at the important indices, which are inflation and jobs and growth.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Robert Buckland. Lots more to come in the next.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. So much more to come in the next hour. We've got Kemi Badenoch in the studio and the man backing a Boris comeback. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Camilla. It's exactly 10 a.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top stories this hour. The King has spent his second night in hospital following a procedure for an enlarged prostate. The Queen visited the London clinic yesterday and spent 3 hours with her husband as he recuperates. King Charles is said to be doing well after the procedure. The Princess of Wales is also at the same hospital following abdominal surgery. Charles Ray, former royal correspondent for The Sun, told GB News the support that the royal family are showing each other is comforting.
Normally, we don't see royals turn up at a hospital when one of them's in hospital, apart from occasionally the Queen visited Prince Philip in one of his longer stays in hospital. But it's nice to see that they are behaving as they always are, like normal people. And I think this is showing the way the royal family is now. And isn't it great to see a united royal family instead of the bickering that's been going on behind the scenes involving Prince Andrew?
The United Nations has fired 9 members of staff following allegations that they were involved in the Hamas October 7 attacks on Israel. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says he will hold to account any UN employee involved in acts of terror. 12 staffers have been implicated so far. Another is confirmed dead. The identities of 2 are still being clarified. Guterres is urging countries to continue supporting the UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians after 9 governments, including the UK, paused funding. Miri Eisen is from the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. She told us it's a complicated situation.
The bulk of the employees are the Palestinian refugees themselves. And as such, it's very challenging to understand that difference that we have there, that they participate and are part of the Palestinian people inside the Gaza Strip. And in this case, Israel transferred hardcore evidence of the actual participation of 12 employees in the attack.
The government has reportedly granted refugee status to 4 Rwandans despite attempting to pass a new law declaring it as a safe country. The Observer newspaper says the Rwandan citizens were handed asylum after their fears of persecution were ruled to be well-founded. One, a supporter of Rwanda's opposition party, was granted asylum just a day after the Home Office told the Supreme Court that the country was safe. The news comes ahead of a crucial week for the Rwanda bill as it gets debated in the House of Lords. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get back to Camilla.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lots more still to come. In just a minute, I'll be speaking to former Labour Minister and chair of the Jewish Labour movement, Ivor Kaplan, following Holocaust Memorial Day yesterday. Will Rishi Sunak make it to the next election? I'll be asking Kemi Badenoch that question and more. David Campbell-Bannerman will join me to discuss the prospect of a Boris Johnson-Nigel Farage dream ticket, would you believe? I'll also be joined by Stephanie Grisham, Trump's former White House press secretary. Can the Donald fight his way back to the White House? We'll find out that and more a little later. First of all, though, let's speak to Ivor Kaplan. He's the former Labour minister and former chair of the Jewish Labour movement. Lovely to see you this morning, Ivor. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Good morning to you, Camilla.
Now, anti-Semitism once again on the rise. We've had some quite startling statistics from the campaign for anti-Semitism. We hear from Jewish people all the time that they're not feeling safe on the streets of London and beyond. One needs to ask the question, has this rise in anti-Semitism, I know, of course, fuelled by what's going on in the Middle East, but from a Labour perspective, it all started with Jeremy Corbyn in recent times, didn't it?
Well, it did, of course, in those quite awful 5-year period that Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party. I think it's fair to say that since 2020, that has been addressed by Keir Starmer and the whole team in order to try and make it clear to people that what had happened previously was unacceptable. And I think part of the problem today is what we see almost every Saturday now in London, for people demonstrating about some sort of idea that they should be supporting Hamas. Hamas is a terrible organisation. It's not even supported across the Palestinian people in both the West Bank and in that part of where they are so dominating. But at the same time, it's clear that what we have to do, unless the hostages who they have taken, which is now 140 people, are let free, then there cannot be any way of taking this matter forward.
I mean, you say that Labour's cleaned up his act, and I think we can say that partially, but at the same time, we've had only this week to hear Ali, who's a Labour MP, having to apologise for saying that Rishi Sunak had, quotes, the blood of thousands of innocent people on his hands. We've had Kate Osamor having to apologise for being critical of Israel while at the same time signing a Holocaust memorial book. We've also had the prospect of Asmana Begum, another Labour MP. She had supported the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, which protested outside the Israeli embassy literally within hours of the October the 7th attacks. She's also been signing Holocaust memorial books. These Labour MPs should be stripped of the whip, shouldn't they?
I cannot really believe that they still are in the whip of the Labour Party. I think this is absolutely something they should never have done. There are ways of making sure, as a Member of Parliament, that you can have comment within your own organisation of the Labour Party. Those comments can be private. I heard earlier, Kemi talking about that in respect to the Conservative Party on Laura's show. So, there are ways of hearing what you want to know and what you want to say. And that's a sensible way of doing it. But far too many think that they have to be public. And sometimes that's just the wrong thing to do.
I mean, if you're going to be accusing Israel of genocide in one breath and then signing a Holocaust memorial book in another, you're just a giant hypocrite, aren't you?
To some extent, yes, is the answer to that, Camilla. There's no reason at all for, even in the UN, the South Africa case has really been sidelined because it didn't come to what South Africa wanted, which was to stop the whole thing and have some form of a stoppage in the fighting, as they say. The problem is that's not possible because you have to come to an agreement with Hamas. And that's not possible because Hamas are not an organisation who you can debate matters with.
No. Let's move on to other matters, Ivor. We had Keir Starmer in the week accusing the Tories of stoking the woke wars. And some on the right have said, well, hang on a minute, weren't you the one who took the knee back in the day with Angela Rayner? I mean, was he wrong in retrospect to have taken the knee?
Look, I think this is all very, very trivial, and I don't think it's something that will be at the centrepiece of the general election campaigns coming up pretty soon. Look, these are things that happen, and they're comments. Let's just move on and go from there.
But don't you think that the culture wars do matter to Labour voters, not least in the Red Wall? I mean, people do get irritated with what they see as sort of institutionalised wokery. Of the issuing, for instance, of trigger warnings, of taking the knee, of being forced to kowtow to sort of different trends. They're worried as well about the kind of wokery and not being able to criticise certain things, such as the obsession with transgenderism in schools.
Well, I think there are lots and lots of issues that come into that category of comment, if you like. But I think at the heart of a general election, it's a different set of comments. And those will be the kind of comments that we've heard constantly about the state of the country, about the state of what people want in the health service, about the state of education. These are all the critical areas that have consistently been part of general election campaigns as long as you want to go back. And I think that will be the case when we get there.
Let's talk about defence briefly, because you were once a defence minister, Ivor, and I wondered what you made of the comments that were made in the week by General Sir Patrick Sanders that Britain should train a citizen army ready to fight a war on land in the future. Would you fight if asked? What did you make of that statement?
Well, I when I was a minister, I actually went down to Iraq for 36 hours, and it was pretty much being there was quite an experience, I have to say, and something I will never ever forget with the troops. But just to be clear about this, there is no way that the United Kingdom should ever consider conscription. Conscription hasn't worked around the world, and it works just about in 3 or 4 countries, Israel, Russia, and North Korea. So I don't think conscription is the answer. The answer is we need a better and bigger army. We had
Yes.
a better and bigger army, and in the last 10 years, that has been reduced by over 20,000 military operators. So we have a situation where it's just too small now if there is the need for armed forces to be taken around the world.
Finally, then, should that be Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey's priority, grow the army, give it more numbers and maybe increase defence spending should Labour come into power?
Well, that all depends on what the money is. And I think that's an interesting area of policy, both for the Labour Party and I think more for the general public. But at the same time, what you have to do is you can't actually make these decisions now because the Labour Party needs to actually look at the real books and then know what they can and can't do.
Ivor Kaplan, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lovely to speak to you.
Pleasure, thank you.
Well, do not move a muscle because in just a minute I'll be speaking to the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, about the future of the Tory party and whether she's the future leader that everybody's talking about. Stay tuned.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to be joined now by the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Kemi Badenoch. Lovely to see you, Minister. Thank you for coming in the flesh. Always best to do an interview.
This is my first time in the GB News studio.
I'm very honoured that you've chosen
occasion.
me.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And you're very much the woman of the moment because you're featuring in quite a lot of newspaper coverage today. We'll get onto that in just a minute. First of all, let's talk about Post Office Chairman Henry Staunton. Did you fire him or was it by mutual consent?
It was by mutual consent, but I explained to him why we needed new leadership. When I first became Business Secretary, there were three things I realised immediately. One, that we needed to get money out of the door immediately.
Yes.
The second was just making sure that it was all done properly and fairly. And the third, just looking at the post office, its governance, how it's run. It's a very odd organisation. It's in the public sector, but not quite. And it fulfills a unique role. And they've been having difficulties on the board. And when I looked at it, I decided that given everything that's happened, given the renewed interest or the new interest in some cases into the Horizon scandal, we just needed someone different.
When you say about getting that money out the door, I note that Alan Bates, Mr Bates, who's obviously been the champion of all of the victims in this, has written to your colleague Kevin Hollingrake saying we need this compensation to be expedited as soon as possible. Are you going to meet that August 2024 deadline? Do you think, to compensate everybody?
So the intention is to, if I could get it all out tomorrow, I would do so. We have not set a deadline because we don't want to create a hostage to fortune. Our priority is looking after all those people who have been wronged. And Kevin Hollingrake has been a brilliant, brilliant minister. He was doing the job before I became Business Secretary, and he told me everything. And I just trusted him. I said, you know what you're doing. You're on top of all the detail. Let me know what senior approval you need. But he has spoken to Alan Bates on multiple occasions, unlike Lib Dem ministers, Davey, who told him to go away. We are going to do everything we can. We want people to trust us, that there is a team here that really cares.
But they can't be left too much longer, can they? I mean, justice delayed is justice denied.
Absolutely.
And at the moment, it seems like very few of them have actually got that full amount of planned compensation.
So we have given about 2/3 of the people who should have got compensation. We've got the money. The difficult area has been around the convictions. We wanted to see convictions overturned. We are now pushing that through. The legal precedent is new. That was an argument that was very difficult, but we finally won it. So now that we've got that in, we've got the agreement there. There will be a process, and we're going to move as quickly and swiftly as we can. I've tasked officials to work on it. It's all hands on deck to get that cash out.
There's so many subjects to ask you about, so let's just move on to the retained EU law bill, because sometimes I mention your name to some of the righties, some of the kind of Maastricht lot in your party, and they kind of roll their eyes and say that you haven't done enough to scrap EU laws. How many EU laws have actually been scrapped?
About 2,000 have been revoked or reformed. So
out of how many?
Probably out of about 4,000 or 5,000. But
so less than half.
Yes, but we have to remember, just because something was done while we were in the EU doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, if there's an EU law, I mean, I'm just, just speaking hypothetically, if there's an EU law that says, we don't want, you have to create a product this way so that children don't choke, I'm not going to scrap it just because it came from the EU. So there are many things that were fine. The reason why we left wasn't just to remove everything that was EU. It was about being able to pick and choose what we want to do. And that's what the over 2,000 that we have done, either revoked or reformed, relate to. And one of the things that I don't think a lot of people understand is that sometimes if you want to change something, you need to keep it first and then edit it rather than just delete it, because then you have to start from scratch. So people who don't understand that process just wanted a big bonfire. The big change I made, which the people you mentioned were upset about, was about removing the bonfire of regulations, making it transparent. They just wanted everything to go, let's not worry about what they were. I think people should know what we're doing. So I made it clear, this is all that's been found so far. It wouldn't have mattered whether I changed that or not. The same number of EU laws would have gone. We've added a few more since then, and we're doing a really good job. What people need to understand is that there is a plan to take advantage of Brexit. That is what we're doing. I wasn't an MP when we voted to leave the EU. And one of the things I found shocking becoming an MP was all the arguments we were having going round and round because the plan wasn't there. Rishi's got a plan. It's very clear. It's not going to be everything on day one, but every day there will be something new that we find that we can make better, and that's because of the changes we made. Most importantly, ending the oversight of the European Court of Justice, not the other one, the Court of Justice, that now has no interpretive oversight of what we do
What about the other
in Great
one,
Britain.
the ECHR? I mean, there's been lots of calls for us to leave. What do you think?
I think a lot of the calls that people are making are a response to what we're seeing on immigration. People are exploiting our country. They think that they can do what they like and a lefty lawyer from somewhere is going to help them out and help them to stay here. And they usually use the Human Rights Act, which is based on the European Court of Human Rights. And what I say to people is that this is something that we have not ruled out. It's not the first thing that we want to do. We have other plans first, because there are many good things that are in the Human Rights Act. And there are many rights which we have which we don't want to just make go away. We have to think about a plan to keep what's good and remove what's bad. So we have to think about it very carefully. But I wouldn't rule it out, but we're not there yet.
And when it comes to legal migration, because obviously a lot's been said about stopping the boats, I mean, these levels that we're currently seeing, 700, 800,000 nearly, that's too high, isn't it? I mean, would you like to see a cap in future on legal migration into this country?
It is absolutely too high. I'm not going to lie, Camilla, I was astounded when I saw those figures. And it is one of the things that I think make people feel less trusting of politicians, because we said that we were going to control immigration. I think that we've always talked about a cap. When David Cameron was Prime Minister, he used to talk about net migration being in the tens of thousands.
Would you like to see a return to that?
What I don't want to do is set a figure, because as Business Secretary, I see the other side of it. People demanding.
But then the public think if a figure isn't set, then a figure is never met.
So that is right, but I'm not the person to set that figure. It has to be the Home Secretary, and it has to be given...
Would you urge the Home Secretary to perhaps put it at, I don't know, 200,000?
I have regular conversations with the Home Secretary, but getting fixated on a particular figure. If you say 200,000, people say, well, why not 195? And I don't want us to have that conversation. 700,000 was too high. And one of the reasons why I think that we ended up there was because there was so much distracting the government of the day. Boris Johnson was Prime Minister then. Every time he was at the dispatch box, people were asking him questions about Partygate. They should have been asking him questions about immigration. And it's because we spend a lot of time on trivia.
So you're saying that Boris Johnson was asleep at the wheel on immigration?
I said distracted. He was in charge at that time. The person who's fixing it...
wasn't he?
Well, he'll have to speak for himself. The person who is cracking down on it is Rishi Sunak.
OK.
That's what I want your viewers to remember.
Although that's not quite borne out in the numbers yet.
No, but those numbers that have come out were under Boris.
OK.
We will see what the numbers are.
We'll see a reduction, will we?
Yes. We will see, I think that we will. I think that we will.
Another criticism that's been made of your department is this situation with Tata Steel. As somebody put it to me, why did your department give them $500 million with no strings attached? And now we've seen these blast furnaces closed ahead of time.
Well, we actually announced this and the whole plan in September. So I was very surprised when I saw the unions coming out and Labour being opportunistic, jumping on this. They know exactly what the plan is. Tata Steel is losing £1.5 million a day. Steel is not a profitable industry because the Chinese are oversupplying. So we need to think about how we run that industry. If they walk away, we'll have to spend £2 billion and about 20,000 people will lose their jobs. 8,000 in the company, probably another 12,000 or more in the supply chain. So rather than have that, we gave them some money. They're still going to spend $1.5 billion investing in Port Talbot. They're going to turn the area around, regenerate. Some jobs will go because the new type of furnaces aren't going to need those skills. But we've saved 5,000 jobs. So it isn't about the job losses. It's about the jobs saved. It would have been this 5,000 or zero. And that's the real story. And it's so annoying when you see Labour, who've got no plan, they've got no plan at all, talking about, 28 billion and we're just going to do a green transition. They don't have any idea how they would do this. We're the ones who've got a plan and we're sticking to it, and it is going to work and it'll deliver for the people of South Wales.
Let's move on to a different topic entirely, transgenderism in schools. You'll be familiar, because I know you've commented on this extraordinary story of this 4-year-old primary school student in a Church of England school is a boy, has been allowed to go to school as a girl, aged 4, and we learned this morning from the Sunday Times that fellow pupils and indeed their parents weren't informed. First of all, should we have 4-year-olds allowed to identify as a different gender?
No. No, we shouldn't. And this is why we brought out the guidance at the end of last year. Now, these decisions were made before the government had published that guidance. But this is one of the problems that many schools are dealing with. A lot of teachers don't know what to do because there are big campaign groups out there, Stonewall, Mermaids, they call themselves charities, but they are out there making materials, telling people that you should be doing this for children of that age. I think that is utterly ridiculous. I have a 4-year-old. She sometimes tells me that she's a rabbit. That doesn't mean I'm going to start giving her carrots for every single meal. We need to be able to allow children to be children without pandering to a lot of ideology that has no place, certainly not in primary school.
And what do you say to the accusation that's been made of you many, many times that you're a TERF, that you're a transphobic person, that you're not standing up for the rights, not just of, people who don't identify as different genders, but of transgender people?
Well, the fact that they're resorting to abuse rather than making the argument shows what those people are like. We want to make sure that genuine trans people are able to live their lives with dignity and in privacy, and for to have a community be kind to them. What is happening is you have a lot of other people with a different agenda piggybacking on it and actually making life more difficult for those genuine trans people. We need to be able to explain what it means. We didn't have this problem 20 years ago. And when I speak to people who have been transgender for decades, they say that our lives were fine until people decided to take us up as a cause.
Do you think it's been a trend, particularly among younger people, to identify as a different gender?
There's certainly social contagion. So I have come across cases where some children feel that they're being bullied and they need a label to protect themselves, and they feel that if they say they're trans, then people will treat them differently. So we should be dealing with the underlying cause bullying. We see a lot of comorbidities. That means other issues being present, as well as children claiming that they're gender questioning, such as being autistic, for example. There's a lot that's going on in this space, and it is still quite new. And what we shouldn't be doing is putting children on a pathway to making irreversible decisions, because if you start telling a 4-year-old that they're a girl, not a boy, they're going to take that with them till they're 18 and possibly...
would you like to see puberty blockers stopped being prescribed to children unless, perhaps they're intersex or there are medical explanations for it? Would you rather not see puberty blockers prescribed?
I don't think they should be the first port of call if somebody is presenting as gender questioning. So there is an affirmation pathway where someone comes to you and says they're a different gender, and you immediately start giving them drugs. That should not be happening. Puberty blockers actually have some very good uses. I know of a case of a 5-year-old boy who was starting puberty.
Right.
Just that's
a medical case. Then.
Yes, that's what it's there for. It shouldn't be there for lifestyle presentation or anything like that. This is a very serious thing. It is something that requires medical diagnosis, gender dysphoria, and we should treat it like that, not as a social change in and of itself.
I know that you're going to say that you're backing the Prime Minister and that all of this talk of leadership is for the birds, but at the same time, I do need to address some of the stories that have emerged in papers in recent times. So first of all, somebody quoted somebody as quoting you in a piece by Andrew Marr in the New Statesman, suggesting that you didn't want to go for the leadership now because, quote, you have said, Rishi has got to own defeat. Is that something you've ever said?
No. And also, the fact that we can't even say who said these things. It's always an anonymous person said they overheard someone else talking about these things. And with the people who are causing trouble, when they're asked, they say, oh, nothing to do with us. It must be Kemi, pointing that it's distraction tactics. I do support the Prime Minister. If people want to know whether or not I support him, they should look at my actions. When Liz Truss resigned from the Premiership, the first thing I did was come out and say Rishi should be the Prime Minister, and I gave the reasons. I have backed him consistently every time because I know how difficult his job is. I see him working so hard. No one works harder than that man.
But then people say you're more charismatic fantastic. You're clearer in an ideological perspective on what you're saying. You've been really clear in this interview this morning. That actually there's even polling in The Sun on Sunday today to suggest that if you were in charge of the party, you might be more likely to win the next general election. That must be compelling if you take a kind of for the country view as opposed to for the party view.
No, it isn't compelling, because this is not a popularity contest. It is not about, we are not celebrities. There is a job to be done, and he can do that job. And also, I think it's really important that the public see that when somebody is in place as Prime Minister, we don't just keep disposing them, oh, the polls don't look so great, or let's try somebody else. That's not serious. That is not serious. How would I know that I wouldn't be disposed of a couple of weeks later? You read the language that people use, people talking about installing Kemi as Prime Minister like I'm a set of windows. These people don't talk to me. They don't talk to me.
But at the same time, it must be quite flattering to see yourself at the top of the grassroots poll on Con Home as their favourite to replace him, should the time ever come. I mean, presumably you look at that poll on occasion, or your advisors do.
It's a double-edged sword. So
yes, you do look at it.
It's nice. Of course we see it.
Yeah.
But when you have that, you also have a target on your back. Lots of people decide, ooh, well, that's the person that we need to take out, or that's the person who we can blame, and so on.
Well, that's
and it's very distracting for me doing my job as business secretary, which I actually love. This is a great job.
But this is of interest to the GB News audience,
right.
So it's worth me asking you these questions while I have the privilege of your company in the studio. The other attack line on you from colleagues is that you are too close to Michael Gove, and by association, Doogie Smith, who, of course, has been pinpointed by Nadine Dorries as the man at the centre of the plot to unseat Boris Johnson. Are you close to Michael Gove and Doogie Smith? Are you too close, in fact?
All right, so I will start. There's several things I need to say. One, almost everything in Nadine's book, pardon me, almost everything in Nadine Dorries' book is nonsense. It is, I hear it, one of my constituents bought the book and told me, I know this isn't true because I was there at your selection. What is described there is nonsense, that you were the chosen one. There was somebody from number 10 we all knew was the person we were expected to pick. So there are a lot of lies there. Do I know Michael Gove? Yes, he was my Secretary of State. We worked very well together.
I mean, people say that he's a very close advisor of yours. Listen to him
of
a
course,
lot.
this is what they say. Do you know why they say it? Because they look at me and they look at what I say and they think, oh, she couldn't possibly have thought of that herself. Some man from somewhere must have put it in her brain. What they're really saying, and I've had this from Labour MPs as well, who claim that the speeches I make about race and attacking Black Lives Matter, that no black person would say that. A white person must have written that speech for her. This is nonsense.
Yeah.
What they're doing is really insulting me and my intelligence, that I couldn't possibly be making decisions without these people telling me what to do. Michael Gove was my Secretary of State. We were very good friends, slightly less so now. We still have a good professional working relationship. I know Dougie Smith's wife, Munira, very well. She was Deputy Mayor for London under Boris Johnson when I was an Assembly member. So these are people that you know. And just because you know people doesn't mean that they're there controlling you. It is all nonsense. And I'm really glad that you asked, because it gives me an opportunity to tell your viewers that it is nonsense.
But then at the same time, you know, Simon Clarke's intervention in the week.
Not helpful.
Not helpful.
I called
None
him
of
after.
this is helpful. What's wrong with the Conservatives? Why can't they all just get along?
We do. We do. There are 350 of us.
I know. If you've got the One Nation group at the throats of the so-called five families of this Rwanda bill.
No, they're not. People have to do what is in their conscience. And actually, what is really interesting is that having disagreements about what we should do on a bill is seen as a sign of a party infighting, when actually we're thinking. People have different views, we have a vote, and a collective view is presented. People should be more worried about Labour. They haven't got a plan. They don't know what they want to do. Because they're quiet doesn't mean that they're all getting along.
Labour,
it's because their minds are empty. They're an empty party.
You're the chief protagonist, apparently, on stoking the woke wars. What's your response to that?
Who's that? Keir Starmer?
Yes.
This is a man who took the knee for Black Lives Matter. Of course he shouldn't have done. It was a passing fad. It was utterly ridiculous. There are all sorts of false statistics about how racist this country is. It isn't, because if it was, I wouldn't be sitting here as business secretary talking to you, and we certainly wouldn't have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. This is a man who will bend to anything that comes along. Ooh, is BLM the thing we're doing now? Let's all take the knee, everybody. And that is what he will do as Prime Minister. People should be warned. And I would say also to your viewers, those of them who are thinking about voting reform, you vote reform, you get a Labour landslide.
OK.
Yeah.
On that note, as we can't turn this into a party political broadcast,
OK, sorry.
But thank you so much for your time on a Sunday morning. Lovely to see you for the first time on GB News.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kemi. Up next is David Campbell-Bannerman, the chairman of the Conservative Democratic Organisation. What exactly is this new right-wing splinter group that Kemi doesn't suggest that the Tories are all at each other's throats, but are they? Is there a secret plan to bring back Boris? All will be revealed next.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company here on a Sunday on GB News. Don't forget that later on I'm going to be speaking to a Trump expert to get their take on whether he can make a tremendous return to the White House. But first, I'm joined in the studio by David Campbell-Bannerman. I call him DCB just for short, as everyone does. He's a former Conservative MEP and chairman of the Conservative Democratic Organisation. DCB, lovely to see you
Nice
this
to see you,
morning.
Camilla.
Now, tell us, did you catch Kemi Badenoch's interview just then? Did you catch
Yes,
any?
yeah, a little
Do
bit.
you find her impressive? What do you think about her?
I think Camilla is very gutsy and she's doing a great job on the trade front. I mean, I suppose the question that you asked is like the control of Michael Gove, alleged control of Michael Gove, and being very close. She resigned as head of candidates for Conservative Party to back him in 2019. So
why is this alliance with Michael Gove so problematic for so many Tories?
I think a lot of Tory MPs don't trust Mr Gove, I'm afraid.
Although Mr Gove is not here to defend himself
he's
against
not.
such allegations.
And he has been a great
but
minister in
don't
the
trust
past.
him because of the knifing of Boris, presumably.
Well, that's all part of it, but it's a complex picture, like all of these things are. But all I can say is that is an issue that has been raised with me.
All right, OK, so that's an issue, her closeness to Gove, potentially.
Yeah.
Do you agree with one former Cabinet Minister who said this week, we know Rishi is absolutely useless, but replacing him now would be an extraordinary act of self-sabotage?
I don't agree, actually. I mean, I think there's time to turn things around with the new leader. Yes, I do. I mean, remember Boris took over in June 2019.
I know, but are you still holding
9%.
a candle for Boris Johnson? Is this realistic?
No, it's not about Boris. I mean, Boris could be part of a team, by the way. I think I would make him vice-chairman if he wants it, to campaign on the Red Wall as part of a new leadership team. But he's not an MP. It's not really realistic to bring him back at this point.
OK, so who would head up a new leadership team, then, if not Boris?
Well, I would look to Suella Braverman. I think she has been brave.
She's not very popular in the country, is she?
Well, remember, Maggie Thatcher wasn't very popular. I think she says a lot of gutsy
but
things.
Is Suella the next Thatcher? I mean, actually, people today in the papers have cited Kemi as being the next Thatcher. She's very clear ideologically.
Yeah, she's black and white. She makes some, tough decisions, Kemi, which I do admire, and there is that characteristic.
But isn't Suella just so Marmite?
To some extent, as Thatcher was, but I mean also Jacob, Priti Patel. There's a number of Jacob.
Do we think Jacob goes down well on the council estates of the UK?
Well, funnily enough, I think he does in a kind of Farage way. He's quite popular with builders, decorators, with taxi drivers.
I mean, maybe
so let's not write him off.
As a presenter on GB News, but not necessarily as Prime Minister.
Well, I think
Much as I'm fond of
to be honest, I believe in the strength of polling. You have to kind of look at the polling and see how he plays.
Talking of polling, I'm intrigued by your response to this. We had that poll in the Telegraph, which was a YouGov poll that was carried out by an organisation called the Conservative Britain Alliance. Now, this has been linked to Peter Cruddas, who is a donor of the CDO, the organisation of which you're chairman. So is there a link up with the Conservative Britain Alliance? Who are these people?
No, he made it clear. I asked him directly. He said it's nothing to do with him and he hasn't put any money in. So it's not for him. Well, people are thrashing around to try and find out. Number 10's thrashing around trying to find out.
Well, Will Dry is a former Rishi Sunak advisor who's gone across to this organisation.
I know.
Seems to want to unseat the Prime Minister. Who else might be involved?
Well, there are some theories about a group of advisors, former advisors, being mentioned. I don't know if Dominic Cummings is in there. I'm not saying he is or not, but he is a former advisor.
Lord Frost has been linked to this polling. So, I mean, is Lord Frost somebody that you would back as a future leader?
I think I know him very well, but he's. I don't think he wrote. I don't think he's running this outfit. I think he just wrote the op-ed that went with it, actually really commenting on the poll. It's not his outfit. I have discussed it briefly with him. No, it's a mystery, actually, but there may be some disaffected donors out there. There's quite a few, I'm afraid, at the moment. Behind it. But I think the message is very clear. This poll is 7 times the normal size of a poll, and it says we're heading for a cliff. It's catastrophe time. And, I praise Simon Clarke for being brave enough to say this. I do.
Didn't he embarrass himself a bit last week? I mean, maybe he wanted to take others over the top and he just looked like a lone wolf out there on his own.
No, it's not. He didn't do it for that point of view. I think this is a bit like a volcano. There's an awful lot going on underneath the surface, and you get a few explosions here and there, like the Simon Clarke article, which is unexpected. I didn't expect that.
Is this not just because you don't really like Rishi Sunak and you never wanted him to be Prime Minister because he wasn't the grassroots choice?
It's not personal to him. I mean, the CEO's view is that no one elected him. I mean, the members didn't elect him and MPs didn't elect him. So it was a bit of an appointment, really, and that doesn't help when it comes to these storms. You know, you have shallow roots. It's not personal to him. There was a lack of democracy.
He was unopposed by MPs, but obviously it didn't go to the country, so to speak. It didn't go to the membership at that point for the second time round after he lost to Liz Truss.
Yeah.
I mean, the other argument, of course, is that, yes, the Tories are, according to the pollsters, facing almost certain electoral defeat, maybe even such a bad electoral drubbing that we go back to the days of 1997.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you listen to the campaign director, Isaac Levido, it's quite compelling for him to say, well, it's a case of unite or die. And there's the CDO, your group, and there's all these other caucuses trying to unseat the Prime Minister at a time when the party's already vulnerable. You might actually be pushing it further towards extinction.
I don't think so, because we've got to be realistic. These are not rogue polls. You know, we're now stuck on 20%. We're 24% roughly behind Labour. This is wipeout territory. And, of course, reform has gone up 4 times since Boris was in power.
OK, but aren't you also making that worse, then? I mean, you're propelling reform forward. You're effectively just being a wrecker here. I mean, you're getting your money on Suella. Who else is?
Well, Suella and others, you know, there's a number
who
of...
else?
But, well, as I say, Jacob and Pretty, I think, more centre-right. No, I tell you what, the way I look at it, I'm a marketing man. We are missing Conservative voters. They're on strike. You look at those last 4 by-elections, it wasn't a swing to Labour. One of them actually went against Labour, mid-beds, I think it was. But you had 20,000 missing Tories, and every single one of those by-elections... Well, not apathy. I think it was that Conservatives show their disapproval by not turning up, right? Now, if you had the right leader that appealed to that sensibility with the right policies... I mean, even when Sunak and Hunt talk about cutting taxes, they're not now believed, because 4 months ago they were saying it wasn't possible.
Although, let's see what's put in the budget. Final question.
That helps.
Are the best people to lead this organisation on the right a sort of dream ticket of Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage?
I'd like to see Nigel come back to the Conservative Party. He was Beckenham Conservatives, and he is a Tory, he's a Thatcherite Tory.
But wouldn't him and Boris teaming up be an ideal situation for people in the CDU?
Well, the polls show they would, but Boris isn't an MP. Nigel's not an MP either. But so I think you can get them involved. I think what I'd like to see is a strong Eurosceptic team that wins back the Brexit voters that have gone missing.
OK, so you're going to carry on the fight against the Prime Minister effectively. That's what I'm getting from you this morning.
Well, I'm afraid so. It's not a pretty thing to do, but actually, for the good of the country and the party, we do not want 10 years of Labour. That's an utter disaster, and that's where we're heading. And I remember that as a candidate. In 2001, we got 1 net Tory MP gain.
David Campbell-Bannerman, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Well, we're going to be speaking about Trump in just a moment, but first, here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Looking ahead to today, most of us should see some sunshine at times, and for all, it will be feeling very mild. So we start the day actually with a touch of frost in the east, but here we'll see bright skies from the word go. Elsewhere, a fair amount of cloud around and maybe the odd spit and spot of rain, but most of this cloud will tend to break up a little bit as we go into the afternoon, allowing some spells of sunshine. But up towards parts of Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, we will see this band of rain move in during the afternoon, and that will be accompanied by some very strong winds. But with the winds coming in from the south, it's going to be a very mild day. Actually, some parts of northern Wales could see highs reaching 16 to 17 degrees. Into the evening, the rain just slowly moves its way southeastwards across parts of Scotland, eventually moving into northern England and the far north of Wales later on in the night. But to the south of it, it remains mild but rather cloudy. Could just see a touch of frost as the rain clears up across the far north of Scotland. So Monday morning, we start off rather grey but mild in the south. This rain actually becomes quite slow moving across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So quite a grey, wet day to come here. But to the north of it, actually, it does start to cheer up and we will see some spells of sunshine, but also some blustery showers. Temperatures in the north cooler than on Sunday, but still mild in the south.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Well, after my interview with Kemi Badenoch earlier, lots of you have been getting in touch, so let's see what you're saying. Graham says, Badenoch saying that the chair of the post office was removed by mutual consent is so weak, he should have been sacked on the spot with no pension. Jackie says, Kemi Badenoch sounds like she's making excuses to stay in the EU. Well, she was a Brexiteer, so I'm not sure that quite holds water. Jan from Runcorn says, Kemi Badenoch on GB News this morning is exceptional. Straight talking, straight answers, so refreshing. Kemi for future leader of the Conservative Party, please. Great stuff. All right, well, we're glad to have her in the studio and glad to have more ministers in the studio as time goes on. I think moving to Westminster has been a great move for this particular show because it means we're seeing more people in the flesh. I'm joined now by Greg Swenson, Chair of the Republicans Overseas UK. Greg, we're here to talk about Donald Trump and the latest with the Donald with regard to this litigation case. He's lost this case against E. Jean Carroll, who he had accused of lying. He's now down, we think, $83.3 million. My question is, Greg, does this case and some of the other litigation that's going on actually stand a chance of stopping him getting to the White House?
I don't think so, Camilla. It's really helped him, if anything, in the last 9 months or so. You've seen a huge uptick for Trump's numbers, President Trump's numbers. After the first indictment, the Alvin Bragg indictment, he went up 15 points. Most of that came from Ron DeSantis. So that's a 30-point swing from the indictments. I think this one will probably help him more in the nomination. The problem is what it does in the general election, and that's yet to be seen.
I mean, if some states say, no, he can't stand here, that poses a significant and unprecedented problem, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And, look, this is the Democrats claiming to want to preserve democracy by violating the Constitution and violating democratic norms. So it's kind of ironic that those attempts to block him from the ballot, first of all, they're going to fail, but they also help him in terms of the nomination support that he's getting. Because, again, it just shows the weaponization of the system by the Democrats. So he's really benefiting from this and other those types of attempts by the Democrats.
I mean, I understand the argument that you're making that the more he's attacked, the more popular he becomes. But you're talking about the Democrats being against the Constitution. Come on, Greg. January the 6th. I mean, there are a great many people who might have supported Trump in the past who saw what happened during the Capitol riots and have been completely turned off.
Oh, Camilla, it's a good point. Look, I mean, his behavior was disgraceful on January 6th. I'm not sure it's as much or as bad as the Democrats are making it out to be, and calling it an insurrection and having this, the January 6th, let's call it a show trial in Washington. But that is going to affect it, and I think this is why President Trump is only polling at 80. And when I say only, it's because incumbent presidents, and he is, a quasi-incumbent, they usually poll at 90 or better. And if they poll below 90, they have real challenges in the general election. The best hope for President Trump in winning, in spite of, some of the hiccups like January 6th, like his tendency to be unfiltered, the best part of the system for him is Joe Biden, who's polling even lower Donald Trump. So you have two candidates that are polling at 40%. Biden's slightly lower than that. He's polling at 31 on the economy, 33 on foreign policy, and 18 on the border. 18% President Biden is polling at the border. So he is a very weak candidate, and that is creating a binary choice. And I think at this point, it looks like a lot of voters will support President Trump, even if he never gets back to 45% in ratings.
Let's look at Trump's other rival for the Republican nomination, Nikki Haley. I mean, obviously, he's come out on top in both Iowa and New Hampshire, but she's saying the race has only just begun. It isn't over yet. I mean, is she deluding herself?
I don't think so. I mean, look, there's not a great chance that she's going to win. Obviously, Trump has got all the momentum. He did very well in Iowa, not quite as well in New Hampshire as his campaign had hoped. But I think there's merit to her staying in because this is a very unusual election. Anything can happen. You've got two rather elderly candidates. So I think it's probably worth sticking around just in case number 2, is elevated to number 1. She is winning delegates. Obviously, she's not winning as many as Trump, but she got 9 delegates in New Hampshire. President Trump got 12. So, he has some vulnerability. So I was hoping Ron DeSantis would stick around too. I was supporting Governor DeSantis and disappointed that he dropped out.
Why do you think he did drop out? I mean, he obviously saw that his numbers are well behind Trump, but he hasn't been able to recreate the magic of his Florida governorship, has he? He's sort of appeared on telly and seemed a bit stilted and unsure of himself.
Well, yeah, look, he's the same personality that he had when he ran for re-election in Florida in 22. So I never really bought into the personality argument because it didn't change. What did change was the indictments of President Trump. And if you look at the polls before the raid on Mar-a-Lago in August of 22, it was Trump +9. The week after the raid, Trump +39. Same thing last year when they were basically in a dead heat and CNN had DeSantis up 2 points. And then when the indictment started, 15 points for President Trump. That all came from DeSantis. So I think that the governor had to drop out because he was in the same lane as President Trump, and he saw no path to the election. Whereas Mrs. Haley she's getting the never Trumpers, she's getting the moderates, she's getting the independents that really will probably never vote for President Trump. So I don't think Governor DeSantis had a chance. It was probably the right thing, and he's effectively out of money as well.
Really briefly, Greg, because we're running out of time. If it is Trump versus Biden, who wins?
Unless something changes, it will be Trump, but it will be very close. This won't be easy for President Trump.
All right, Greg Swanson, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Camilla.
It's certainly one to watch, isn't it? What a year 2024 is shaping up to be, both with the UK and US elections seeming to at least promote very many headlines for people like me. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I'll, of course, be back next Sunday at 9:30. Up next is my paper reviewer extraordinaire, Michael Portillo, with a jam-packed show. If any of you missed any of today's show, don't forget, and some of you don't know this, but we do play highlights at 6 p.m. on GB News. So if you've missed a bit, tune in from 6 and have a great Sunday.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news,